Okay. Well, thanks for having me. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we do in terms of response to child abuse and neglect. In particular, I'll try to frame it around sexual assault. And Mary was quite correct in that many of us don't know what the community has decided to do with this particular issue, including myself. Up until recently, I took this job in January. I really didn't know of this program and the national effort in toward direction. So I find it really interesting, and I think it's a really valuable service for any community to have. So let's put this into context, at least the abuse and neglect of children in context of the United States. Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Statistics, OJJDP reports that in any given year there's roughly 800,000 substantiated cases of abuse and neglect of children in the United States. Okay, so let's compare that to what we know about felony crimes, the most serious crime tried by our criminal justice system. From victimization studies, we know that there are roughly 2.3 to 2.5 felony-type crimes that happen out there. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're reported to the police, but through anonymous victimization surveys, we find that that's kind of the estimate. As the process funnels down, and we get down to actually conviction of these crimes, we can have anywhere from 100 to 150,000 felony convictions in a given year. So if we take roughly 2.5 million and 150,000 convictions, that's a very small percentage. It's under 5-6%. So if you can compare 800,000 substantiated abuse and neglect cases to 150,000 felony convictions, that should put the endemic nature of child abuse and neglect in very good context. It's a very big problem. And, you know, if we can even think about what doesn't go reported, that problem becomes even bigger. Especially when we put it in the context of the United States versus the rest of the world. The United States has one of the highest rates of infant mortality of any industrialized Western nation, and one of the highest rates of children living in poverty of any industrialized nation. Depending on the data you look at, it's number one. And it's really surprising to tell people that. They're often shocked that maybe the most well-off country in the world has so many kids living in squalid conditions. So we'll take a look at a national model today, which the county has adopted to address part of this issue, and hopefully you'll have time, a little bit of time for questions. So with that in mind, I want to give you the opportunity to play policymaker, social services supervisor in a hypothetical situation. Imagine that you are going to design a community response to child abuse and neglect, and money and infrastructure is absolutely no problem. Now, that's not the hypothetical part, because we know that in social services, money and infrastructure is never a problem. We have all the money we need, we have all the staff, this sort of thing. But think about it, and help me out. How would you design this system? Going down to like how we might even begin to address the physical environment that serves youth and families. How would we design it? What would it look like? Somebody?
Like maybe it look like a home or someplace that would be comfortable.
Safe, yes. Home, safe environment to bring kids in, especially in traumatic situations. This is common sense. This is something we'd like to do. Okay, great. How about the expertise of direct care staff? Tammy just gave a great presentation that is part of what we do in our collaboratory efforts, but how would you describe the staff that you employ to respond to these situations?
If they're dealing with troubled kids, you want them to be the top-notch, best, most sensitive, well-trained people you've got.
Top-notch, yes, absolutely. Sensitive, well-trained, on-the-ball folks. And how about availability? Available 24 hours a day. Patient, great training, always up to date, willing to work hard. Okay, great. Collection of evidence from physical evidence, such as what Tammy talked about, or even other ancillary bits of evidence. What would we have? Again, the best technology, the best staff, the best methodology to collect this sort of thing. Okay? So you get kind of what I'm getting at. Interagency collaboration, perhaps. We all know that social service agencies move seamlessly between each other and share information, get along great, always talk to each other. Law enforcement and social services really talk to each other well and collaborate, right? So a lot of these things, of course, we know exist in the real world. And then wraparound services. We're talking about a very traumatic event for a youth and family. what would our wraparound services look like?
Complete.
Thorough and complete, absolutely. Okay, so in our perfect world, this is what it would look like, and it would be a great program. Do you think that current services or collaborative efforts in response to these situations look like this? Obviously not. Okay? Sadly enough, oftentimes, this is what we start out with as a system response to child abuse neglect. And this is not necessarily the fault of an agency or an individual person or even the officer. But if you can imagine law enforcement being the first point of contact in one of these circumstances, Captain Stubing gave us a great kind of overview of this sort of thing. You get sometimes worst case scenarios. So this is actually a screenshot of a video of an interview in a child abuse neglect case. So what do we see here? What can we learn from perhaps maybe the worst case scenario in terms of responding to child sexual assault and abuse? Yeah. So the child, I mean, you can even learn a little bit from body language here. Child is pushed away from the table. We're in a cold, white room. There's a table here separating the interviewer from the victim. How about the officer? What do you learn from the officer? He's just unlucky that he got the call, perhaps. He's in uniform. He has his gear on. And perhaps we don't know, but perhaps he's not specifically trained to do this sort of thing. Okay, so again, not the fault of the officer, not the fault of the agency. It's just simply the matter of how infrastructure and resources have lined up. Okay, so a long time ago, actually in the 80s, people started to identify this problem and took steps to address it, and it has now kind of reached our area. So we have the child advocacy model. Excuse me. It does a number of different things. So the first thing it tries to do is address the environment that these sorts of cases take place in, the interviews and the evidence collection. So obviously some of the things that you pointed out are some of the things that people want to do. You want to have a neutral, child-friendly environment with the most important thing, trained interviewers that are seasoned in responding to these sorts of cases. Know what to look for, know how to interview, and know what to do with follow-up. But also, even just the physical environment can impact how the case is processed or subsequent action. And then the CAC model, the child advocacy model, brings together all involved parties that have a stake in the case so that they can share information, but also so they can follow up and ensure that not only does the model get implemented right, but it's growing all the time. So we have a team that meets pretty consistently on a monthly basis to continually help ensure procedures and standards are set and people are exchanging information. And then also you don't want to reinvent the wheel, so you want to have a good knowledge of community resources, but also make sure that the resources meet up with the situation and there's not a bunch of duplication. And then finally, some follow-up services. So we have an in-house advocacy program that is there to kind of serve as a point of contact, but generally an ear on the telephone that these families can get a hold of and talk to, and if our advocate doesn't know the answer, they can get the answer for this person, so they don't have to be calling frantically to a number of different people. Even though that still does happen from time to time, they at least have a start. Okay, so this is the child advocacy model.